Hey everybody, I'm Jordan with Warpfire Minis, and we're talking about the new General's Handbook. It's been about a month now. I got about 20 or so games under my belt, so just want to walk you through some things I like, some things I don't like, and just things I've learned along the way. So here we go. Alright, so the whole focus of this season is on ANDTORIAN LOCUS units, which is just a wizard that has 9 wounds or less. And why those are important is they get to learn some really cool new spells that they introduced. And then on a couple of the missions, there's a couple like bonus points, or they count as more on an objective and things like that. But for the other realm rules that are specific to this season, the biggest one is the Primal dice. And so at the start of each of your turns, you and your opponent both are going to roll a dice. And for each 4-up you guys roll, so a maximum of 2 per battle round, you get a Primal dice. And you can use these to add on to a casting roll or to add on to an unbinding roll. So you get to roll your cast, and like, let's say you roll a 6 and it casts on a 7. You can say, hey, I'm going to use my Primal dice, add it in there after the fact, and boom, you got it to go off. Now, it's important to remember your opponent gets to do the same thing with his for the unbind. So you roll like a 10. Normally a 10 feels pretty good, but if they're rolling the unbind and then they get to add in that 3rd dice, like on average now they're going to unbind you. So it introduced kind of a cool new mini game where, do I use my dice now? Do I save it for later? Am I going to stack them up for like the bottom of the turn to try and do something big? And overall, I've really enjoyed the Primal dice aspect of it. I was a little weary at first, but they cleared up some rules and it's been really fun so far. And one other thing I've learned when I'm playing my games here, the Primal miscast super sucks. So if you roll the first 2 dice and you get a 1 in there, if you add a Primal dice to it and you roll a 1, that triggers a Primal miscast. And what that is that wizard takes D3 plus 3 mortal wounds, and everything within 3 inches of him takes D3 mortal wounds as well. And so it's easy to tell yourself like, hey, I'm just not going to roll that second one. Like the odds are in my favor, but it happens and you're going to roll that dice and it's going to just put you on your back foot for the rest of the game. So it's not worth it. Like, unless it's like the only thing that can score you your battle tactic, or like you're going to lose the game if you don't get this spell off. But in any instance where you don't absolutely need it, like don't risk it. The other cool thing is on the flip side of it, if you roll 2 6s in your casting roll, then it automatically goes off. It can't be unbound, but you can't cast any more spells with that wizard. So if it's something like Nagash and you're on your first spell and you see a 6 in there, again, be a little bit careful. For everybody else, like if you're casting 1 or 2 spells and you get the auto can't be unbound thing off on the first spell, not a big deal. But like Nagash or anybody who casts a bunch of spells, just be careful of that too. And then the last realm rule, which is easy to forget, and I've forgotten it a bunch and watched my opponents do it too, is the optimal focus. And so that's whoever goes second in the battle round, they can pick either a Locus unit and they can cast an extra spell and unbind an extra spell, or they can pick a hero that's not a wizard and they get an extra command point. So just don't forget to do that. For unique enhancements in this GHB, they have one called a Nullstone enhancement. And what it is if your army doesn't have any wizards at all, it's like a little perk since you don't have any of the Locus units to use. And it's pretty rare. Like the only armies you'll really see it in is something like Blades of Corn or Fire Slayers, where they don't bring a wizard. And the only one that really sees any play is the Pouch of Null Dust, which just makes it if you roll like a double 1 or double 2 or double 3, then it counts as a miscast. And if they used a Primal dice, it counts as a Primal miscast on that one. And they only get to do it once per battle. And again, you're only really going to see it in those 2 armies, or maybe there's a 3rd one out there, but something, it exists, but don't worry too much about it. All right, then we're jumping into the spells. And so for every army that is bringing a wizard, this is where like the Locus units really shine. So there's 3 awesome spells in the GHB: Hoarfrost, Rupture, and then the Merciless Blizzard. And so Hoarfrost, you get to cast it on an 8, which is a little bit tough, but again, you can use that Primal die to make it happen. And you get to pick a unit and pick one of their melee profiles. So like you pick their sword, and you get to roll a dice, and it does D3. So you're either going to get a 1, a 2, or a 3. And then you get to choose if you want to change the hit, the to wound, or the rend characteristic of that weapon for the whole unit. And so you're doing rend pretty much every time, unless you roll a 1 and you already have rend 1. But any kind of unit that has just a ton of attacks. So something like Plague Censer Bearers or Rat Ogres or even Plague Monks for Skaven. Like when you take a Plague Monk that has Rend 0, and now it's got Rend 3, this is a huge damage boost. And so this is just an incredible buff spell that you're going to see in tons of armies, because things like Flesh Eater Courts, they've got ghouls or cryptors. There's almost every army has a unit that does a big volume of attacks with no Rend. So add in Rend 3 to that, and like they're just doing a ton of damage. So you're going to see that one pretty often. Rupture, it's only relevant for lists that bring Kron Spine. And so you're going to see it in like Tzeentch is going to bring it every time. Now they don't have to kill their Magister off automatically. Skaven, like there are some people who are testing it out. And it's just a spell cast on a 10. So again, you might have to use your Primal dice. But it makes it to where Kron Spine instantly goes wild. And when he's wild, he's treated as an enemy unit. He gets +1 to hit, and he can run and charge. So in your movement phase, you're moving him, you're running him way up there. He's just smashing in turn 1 with that +1 to hit. The other cool thing about him becoming an enemy unit and what people are doing is you can cast an endless spell, and then Kron Spine can go charge your own endless spell because it's technically an enemy endless spell to him. And so you can use that to get extra movement on the Kron Spine. Like if his regular movement wasn't going to quite get there, you can push him up, have that endless spell sitting out there. He charges in it another 6 inches and then piles into an enemy unit. And as his Monstrous Rampage, he gets to eat the endless spell, and then he goes up a level. And so if you do that every turn, if you can keep casting endless spells, you can keep feeding him these endless spells, and he's going to be level 3 or level 2 pretty much all game. And it makes it to where your opponent just pretty much can't kill him. So that's a really good trick. You're going to see that a lot. Then the last spell is the Merciless Blizzard, and this one's my favorite. It's the most controversial. It's incredibly powerful. It casts on a 12, so very difficult to get off unless, again, you're using those Primal dice. And like sometimes you can stack those Primal dice. Like if I didn't use them in turn 1, we get another 2 in turn, or at the bottom of the turn. Sometimes I'm rolling 4, 5, 6 d6 to cast this spell because it's that good. And what it is you pick an enemy unit within 12 and you do 4 d6 mortal wounds to it, which is just massive. For every 1 you roll, you take d3 mortal wounds back to yourself. But this is awesome for things like Greyseer for Skaven. Like I can skitter leap them to teleport them 9 inches away from somebody, and then try and cast that Blizzard spell. And like if it's a Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon, I'm rolling these 4d6. I'm doing 12 to 15 wounds, something like that. And it just takes a huge chunk out of them, or sometimes if you spike, you even just kill them right out the gate. And it influences lists a little bit because you have to be very careful with those big units. Like if you have that Zombie Dragon, you don't want to end up within 12 inches of that anyone who has the Blizzard, because any Locus unit can cast it. And so you just have to be very careful with your big important pieces to stay away from that, or to just stack up a bunch of dice so you can make sure you unbind it. Because Blizzard is something where a 100-point wizard can swing the game in a massive way just through one spell. The GHB command traits, they're all just kind of okay. The only one you really see, I think, is the Eye of the Blizzard. And that's if your general's on the battlefield, you get to roll a dice only at the start of your turn. And on a 5-up, you get an extra Primal dice. It's not great, but when you do have an extra Primal dice and have that Primal advantage, like, that's just big. Like, if I know I'm going to cast 4d6 versus your 3d6 to try and cast Blizzard, now there's pretty good odds that I'm going to get Blizzard off. So I think that's going to be the only command trait you see. For the new battalions, you've got the Acolyte Battalion and then the Wizard Hunter Battalion. The Wizard Hunter one is doo-doo. Nobody's going to run it. Don't worry about it. If it's something where you literally can't bring any other battalion at all, then like, okay, throw a few dudes in it. But the Acolyte Battalion has to be 3, at minimum 2, maximum 3 Locus units. And if 2 of them are alive from that battalion at the start of each turn, so you and your opponents, you get to roll a dice, and on a 3-up, you get an extra Primal dice. It's like we were just talking about on that 5-up, it's pretty cool when you get it. But now this one, like on a 3-up, you're likely to have the Primal advantage. And it helps you, like if you're going second in the turn, there's a potential where you could get 3 turn 1, then get another 3 Primal dice turn 2. And when you're going to cast all your spells, like you have a cache of 6 Primal dice to use to cast all of these awesome spells like Hoarfrost or Merciless Blizzard. So that battalion, I think if you're not a 1-drop or 2-drop army and you have Locust units, like just put this battalion in there pretty much every time. for grand strats, most of the time, like armies and most of the good armies, like you have your own book grand strat that's probably a little bit better. But for the ones in the GHB that are actually usable, the best one is the Spellcasting Savant. And it's if your general is a Locus unit, then he has to stay alive. If they're alive at the end of the battle, then you've scored your battle tactic. And so we're seeing that in stuff like Bone Reapers or Seraphon, where they have a hero wizard and they just put Immortus Guard around it, or they have Saurus Guard, something just to give that thing a ton of wounds and where it's going to be able to live at the end of the game. The other two that you'll see sometimes, you've got Overshadow, is if you kill all of the enemy battle line and then you still have one of your battle line units left. And I don't love that one. Just there are some matchups, like if you're playing into 180 zombies, you're never going to kill all the zombies and you just failed your grand strat. You're playing the game down 3 points, you lost. Then the other one I've seen or heard people talking about is Control the Nexus. You have to have 2 wizards at the end of the game in the center of the battlefield. And I just don't love it. Like, I think Spellcasting Savant's probably better if one of those wizards is going to be a little guy anyways. With the new Lookout Sir, if you have a battle line unit and your hero's within 3 inches of it, you can't be targeted by shooting attacks. So it's a little bit easier to keep them alive. It's unless they get within 12 inches. If they get close to you, they can still shoot you. So you'd have to be careful. But when it's the 2 wizards in the center of the battlefield, there's just a lot of counterplay for your opponent. Like, they can go and they have to kill those wizards, or they can clog up the center of the board with another unit, or they can try and tie you up in combat at the end where you're not going to be able to run over there. Sometimes you're going to be pulling yourself off of objectives in turn 5, potentially losing points because you have to get to the center. So use your book one, do Spellcasting Savant. Like, these other ones are okay if all of those are bad for you, but those are going to be the ones you see. Then we're getting to battle tactics, and this is unfortunately my biggest gripe about the book. So battle tactics with Skaven, we don't have any book tactics, so it's always been a struggle to score stuff. In this GHB, the tactics are easier to score, which you would think would be a great big bonus for Skaven, but it's not. When all the tactics are easy to score, sure, I can score some, but it means my opponent is going to have to do near nothing, and they're going to score 5 battle tactics without much energy involved. And so the reason that is because the tactics, you have like invaders. You have to have more units outside of your zone than in your zone. And so turn 1, a lot of times in some of the missions, like it's you're 11 inches up from the board edge, like you're literally walking 3 inches forward, battle tactics scored. There's no counterplay. There's nothing that I can do to prevent that. It's just going to happen. Then you have Surround and Destroy. So you have to have 3 units on the battlefield edges, 2 of them outside of your zone. So again, on those same missions, they can have 1 touch in their back edge, walk 2 units out to the other edges just outside of the 11-inch deployment zone. Boom, they've scored battle tactic number 2. Then you've got Magical Dominance. You have to cast a spell and not be unbound. A lot of times, turn 1, you're going to deploy on your back edge with the little foot wizard. There is no way for me to deploy in unbind range of that, unless I have a Slam that can do it board wide. And so you're going to have a chance to cast the spell, and I'm not going to have a chance to unbind it. Boom, we're 3 tactics in. Then for the 4th battle tactic, we've got Led into the Maelstrom. And you have to charge a hero and charge a battle line unit, and one of those has to finish the turn in combat. And so this one, there's a little bit of counterplay. Like, if I know this is what you're going to do, I can try and redeploy to get out of it. I can try and pile in weird ways. I can try and remove casualties to get you out of combat. But it doesn't make you pick the 2 units. So if you have multiple battle line units and multiple heroes, it's pretty easy to charge one of them in on each one, and then one of them to stay in there. It's a pretty easy tactic to score. Then that leaves us with like the 5th one. If we're only using the GHB ones, now it's getting a little tricky. So we've got one where we have to pick an enemy unit and kill it with spells. So that one, like, you can try and unbind, you have wards, like there's a little chance of failure. The other one is Bait and Trap. If you have 2 units already in combat, you have to retreat 2 and then charge 2. And so situationally, very good. Like, if you find yourself in that position where you have just 2 guys that you want to retreat, you want to charge 2, great, do it. But a lot of times you're going to find yourself where you don't have 2 units in combat to retreat out. So if you're in the situation, great. If you're not, then it's impossible. But the reality is, all of the good armies, they have good book battle tactics. So like that 5th tactic, if you're playing Soulblight, you look down at yourself, you say, do I still have a pulse? Oh, I do. I scored a book tactic. Now I've done five battle tactics that require no interaction at all with my opponent, and I'm going to score max. The only thing I need to do now, focus on primary objectives, and I win the game hand over fist. So I'm really hoping for the next edition that's going to come out next summer that we get the cards like they just did for the Leviathan series. Those are some of the rumors swirling around. And it would just be great if everybody's using the same battle tactics, everybody's playing the same game. Like, that would just be the ideal world. Because right now there are definite haves and definite have-nots. And it's like really impacting the competitive play and casual play. Like, when your opponent can score 5 tactics and there's nothing you can do about it, like, it's just not the best. So hopefully they get that right in the next edition, but we'll see. Next up would be the missions come in the book. I think that they did a pretty good job. All of them have like an extra little layer this time of rules, and most of them are pretty good. There's a couple losers in the book, like I think Towers isn't going to see much play, but overall, like, this is going to be a year-long GHB till we get into the next edition. So they jazzed up the missions where there's a little bit extra going on. As somebody who plays all the time, like, I don't mind extra layers. For new players, it's a little bit more to take in, but I think that they knew that this book was going to last for a year, so they wanted to kind of keep it interesting as much as they could. Then the last big change we got is for endless spells. And so they nerfed a couple of them, they boosted a couple of them up. The big nerf was Chronomatic Cogs. You used to be able to cast it and reroll spells. Now you can't, so you'll never see it again. RIP. The other one that got a big buff was Geminance. That one now, whenever it moves over or lands next to a unit, you get to roll a dice, and on a 2-up, that unit cannot receive or issue commands for that turn. And like, that's just massive. Into tons of matchups, like you're stopping all out attacks, you're stopping all out defenses, you're stopping the Fire Slayer's counter-strike, you're stopping Screech's +1 to hit, +1 to wound, like just all sorts of command abilities are awesome, and they're what make a lot of armies work, and boom, you're just shutting that off. And it's not just for one unit, it's for everything that they flew over or landed next to, which you can hit a ton of units with this one spell. One big takeaway with endless spells this season, you used to be able to cast them and there was a pretty good chance that they could hang out. Like Skaven, we had the Warp Lightning Vortex, and it cast on an 8, so they had to roll a 9 to unbind it. So I could stick it out there and know that it's going to stop their running charges and it's going to do some damage and be great. But now they can use Primal Dice to unbind them. So when you cast that endless spell, you're getting that effect that turn that you cast it. But when it goes into your opponent's turn, if it's going to impact them in a negative way, with Primal Dice involved, they're going to get rid of it more often than not. Like, we used to be able to do cool move blocking things like, oh, I'm going to put this endless spell here. Now you're not going to be able to charge me. But with Primal Dice in play, like, you can still try to do that and like make them use that unbind. But on average, they're going to make it go away, and you kind of play around that. Another big glow up was the Aether Void Pendulum. This one, you cast it with an 8, it moves 8, but can only go in a straight line from whichever way you point it. But for everything it flew over, and then everything it lands next to within an inch, you get to roll a dice, and on a 2-up, it does D6 mortal wounds. And that's just a big one, especially if you have to score that tactic where you have to kill a unit in the hero phase with spells. Like, getting D6 mortal wounds is a great way to help out doing that. So you're going to see that one a lot more often at 40 points. It's a great deal. Another one that got a lot better is the Suffocating Gravetide. And this one, it casts with an 8, and it moves 12, so 20 inches, pretty good range. And anything it flies over, you get to roll amount of dice equal to the models in that unit. And so things like Squigs or Blissbar, things like that have a lot of models in a unit. You fly this thing over, and then 5-up. For each model, you roll dice 5-up, mortal wound. So you're taking out 30% of them, boom, right there. Hopefully trigger a bunch of battle shocks, stuff like that. So pretty good endless spell. And I think it's 30 or 40 points, so it's one you're going to see people just kind of sneak in there because they can. Then the last one, which is my least favorite, but everyone else's favorite, is the Malevolent Maelstrom again. And this thing, it just is a rock star. It's awesome. It casts with an 8, and then it moves 8 at the end of the hero phase. But what it does is, you cast it out, and then for every spell you cast within 12 inches of it, it gets a dice that ticks up. So like, it starts at 1, you cast a spell, it goes to 2. Cast a spell, it goes to 3. And when it gets to 6, at the end of that phase that it got to 6, it explodes. And then it's going to do within 12 inches of it, it does D3 mortal wounds to everything, or 3 instead if it's a wizard. And so what we're seeing is people are casting that, they move it up. Some armies, like if they're running Nagash or Seraphon list, they can get to 6 just with the spells, and then they shoot it forward. But it also ticks up if you kill a model within 12 inches of it. And so people are casting that, put it up near the enemy army if they can, and then just killing models with other spells, which then supercharges this thing. Then at the end of the phase, you get to move it first, and then boom, it explodes and does just D3 to everything within 12. 12 is just massive. And then it doing 3 to wizards instead means all of your little foot hero locus guys, like one cast of that, boom, like they're under half health in most cases. And if they get that off again, like you're in trouble. So we're seeing this in tons of lists, if it's Skaven or if it's Seraphon, or if it's got anything, if you can launch it through a spell portal, you can launch it through a Troglodyte, just any sort of heavy casting army, like they're gonna have this spell in it just because it's that good. This is what I'm kind of hoping. We normally get like a 3-month or 6-month update, like a little battle scroll thing. I'm hoping they tone this one down a little bit. Just, it's not very fun to have like a 12-inch D3 mortal wound blast or 3 mortal wounds, like maybe not the best for the game. Yeah, so that's my thoughts on the new GHB. The Primal dice are super fun. The new missions, I think, are pretty good overall. Only bummers, the battle tactics, again, some of them are too easy. The armies that have really good battle tactics in their book, they're really going to shine. And especially the armies, too, that have really good grand strategies. So, like, Soulblight, they're just going to be up there for the whole year unless something happens. Then if you don't have good book tactics or good book grand strategies, like, you can still get wins. You're just going to have to focus on denying the primary objective points. More than likely, they're going to score that 5 battle tactics, so denying them on the objectives is pretty much like the way to go. So do that, make it happen, and just have a good time. Then if you ever need any models, check us out at warpfireminis.com, and thanks for watching.